The static crackled through the maintenance hangar like distant thunder, pulling Technical Sergeant Zara Wrench Kazemi away from the dismantled radio she'd been rebuilding for the past 3 hours. Her calloused fingers, stained with grease and determination, hesitated over the circuit board as the transmission cut through the white noise with surgical precision. Requesting immediate assistance, aircraft down in Sector 77, pilot designation Wrench. Repeat, we need Wrench. The screwdriver slipped from her grip, clattering against the concrete floor of the abandoned maintenance bay. Nobody had called her by that name in 4 years. Not since the court-martial. Not since they'd stripped her wings and relegated her to fixing broken radios in a forgotten corner of Kandahar airfield, where the desert wind carried more respect than her commanding officers ever had. Zara's dark eyes swept the empty hangar, its shadows stretching long fingers across crates of discarded equipment. The transmission had come through on an old frequency, one the brass had supposedly retired after the incident in '09. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the hand-set muscle memory overriding 4 years of forced silence. Unknown caller, this is Maintenance Station Delta 7. Repeat your last transmission. Static, then cutting through like a blade. Wrench, this is Ghost 6 Actual, we have a situation. Package is down, pilot unconscious, hostiles closing fast. You're the only one who knows the terrain. We need extraction protocols and we need them now. The voice belonged to Colonel Marcus Iron Thorn, the same man who'd signed her discharge papers, who'd looked her in the eye and told her she'd never fly again. Now he was calling her name into the darkness, desperation bleeding through his usually granite composure. Somewhere in the unforgiving mountains of the Hindu Kush, American lives hung in the balance, and the military's discarded daughter was their only hope. Zara's reflection stared back from the radio's black screen, a woman the Air Force had tried to forget, whose expertise they'd buried beneath bureaucratic shame. Her fingers found the headset she'd worn during countless missions, now collecting dust on a workbench. The worn leather still fit perfectly against her ear. Ghost 6 Actual, this is Wrench. Send me coordinates and aircraft type. I'm listening. The night sky beyond the hangar doors stretched endless and unforgiving, holding secrets that only she knew how to unlock. In the distance, the rumble of transport planes taking off reminded her of everything she'd lost and everything she was about to reclaim. The radio crackled again, and with it came the weight of redemption wrapped in static and starlight. Thunder echoed across the Afghan mountains as the first C-130 Hercules emerged from the storm clouds, its 4 turboprop engines fighting against wind that could snap aircraft like twigs. Inside the cramped cargo hold, 12 members of Pararescue Team Alpha checked their equipment with the methodical precision of men who knew death waited in the valleys below. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, stress evident despite his training. PJ Team, we've got zero visibility and mountains everywhere. GPS is acting up and we're flying on fumes. We need that ground guidance and we need it now. Back in the maintenance hangar, Zara had commandeered every functional radio in the building, creating a communication hub that would have impressed the control tower operators who'd once dismissed her as just a mechanic. Her laptop displayed topographical maps she'd memorized during her flying days, when she'd piloted search and rescue missions through these same treacherous peaks. Ghost 6 Actual, Wrench has your location. You're currently 15 clicks northwest of LZ Phoenix, heading into the Razor Ridge Corridor. Recommend immediate course correction to bearing 270 degrees. That storm system is about to turn you into a very expensive crater. Colonel Thorne's voice came back tight. Wrench, how can you possibly know our exact position? We're running dark, no transponder. Zara's fingers danced across the radio controls, fine-tuning frequencies with the precision of a concert pianist. Sir, I flew those mountains for 3 years before you grounded me. I know every thermal, every wind shear, every place the GPS loses signal. Right now, you're approaching Devil's Canyon where the winds funnel up from the valley floor at 60 knots. Your aircraft will experience severe turbulence in 3, 2, 1. The transmission filled with the sound of men fighting against G-forces, equipment rattling, and the pilot struggling to maintain control. When Thorne's voice returned, the mockery was gone, replaced by grudging acknowledgement. "Jesus Wrench, how did you?" "Because I used to be good at my job, sir. Now, do you want to keep questioning my credentials, or do you want me to get your people home alive?" Silence stretched across the radio waves, broken only by the distant rumble of the struggling aircraft. In that pause, Zara felt the weight of every mission she'd flown, every life she'd saved, every night she'd stared at the ceiling wondering if her wings would ever mean anything again. The storm was getting worse, and somewhere in those mountains, Americans were dying while politics and pride stood in the way of their rescue. The downed F-16 Fighting Falcon lay crumpled against a rocky outcropping like a broken bird, its titanium skeleton twisted at angles that made hardened pararescue medics wince. Steam rose from the wreckage in ghostly wisps, metal cooling rapidly in the mountain air as PJ Team Alpha rappelled down from their hovering Black Hawk helicopters. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos, the team's lead medic, keyed his radio while checking the unconscious pilot's vitals. "Wrench, this is Rescue 1 Alpha on scene. Pilot's alive but critical, possible spinal injury, definitely concussed. We need immediate medevac but visibility is near zero and we've got movement in the tree line. Estimate 40 hostiles, maybe more." In her makeshift command center, Zara studied satellite imagery on multiple screens, her mind calculating wind patterns, terrain features, and extraction routes with the speed that had once made her the Air Force's youngest search and rescue pilot. The coffee she'd been nursing had gone cold hours ago, but adrenaline kept her sharp. "Rescue 1 Alpha, Wrench copies. Your extraction bird is a US-60 Black Hawk, call sign Dustoff 72, currently orbiting at Angels 12. Problem is, that landing zone is too hot and too small for a standard approach. You're going to need a high-altitude precision insertion." Santos ducked as an AK-47 round sparked off the rocks nearby. His team had established a defensive perimeter around the crash site, but ammunition was finite and the enemy seemed content to wait them out. "Wrench, we're taking effective fire from multiple positions. Whatever you're planning, make it fast." Zara's fingers paused over the keyboard as memories flooded back. Another mountain, another rescue, the mission that had ended her flying career and started her exile. She'd saved 6 lives that day, but the brass only remembered the regulation she'd broken to do it. Now, history was offering her a chance at redemption, wrapped in static and desperation. "Dustoff 72, this is Wrench. I'm going to talk you through a combat approach that's not in any manual. It's dangerous, and it's going to require absolute trust in my guidance. Are you willing to follow my instructions without question?" The Black Hawk pilot's voice carried the steady confidence of someone who'd flown through hell before. "Wrench, I've heard stories about you from the old-timers. If you can get us down there, we'll follow your lead." As Zara began her detailed approach briefing, using landmarks invisible to GPS but burned into her memory, she noticed something in the pilot's voice. Not the dismissive tolerance she'd grown accustomed to, but professional respect. 4 years of exile hadn't erased her reputation among the aircrew who understood what really mattered in combat. The mountains held their breath as the first phase of the rescue began. Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Dustoff Martinez banked her Black Hawk into a steep approach that would have failed any peacetime flight evaluation, her co-pilot calling out altitude and airspeed in clipped, professional tones. The helicopter's rotors beat against air so thin it barely provided lift, while tracer rounds from the valley floor painted deadly streaks through the darkness. "Wrench, Dustoff 72 beginning approach to LZ Nightmare. Visibility is maybe 50 meters, taking sporadic ground fire from 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock positions. This bet her work, because we only get one shot at this. Zara's voice cut through the chaos with surgical calm. Dust off 7-2, at your current altitude and approach angle, you'll hit a wind shear in 15 seconds. Reduce collective slightly, prepare for a hard left correction. The rocks you can't see are exactly where you think they are. Trust your instincts, not your instruments. Inside the helicopter's cargo bay, flight medic Tony Reeves secured the litter and checked his medical equipment one final time. He'd flown with Martinez for 2 years, through firefights that would have grounded lesser crews, but this felt different. The pilot they were risking everything to save was just a lieutenant, barely old enough to drink legally. Yet someone named Wrench was orchestrating a rescue operation that belonged in aviation textbooks. Rescue on Alpha, Dustoff 7-2 is 30 seconds out. Prepare for emergency extraction procedures. We'll be on deck for exactly 90 seconds, not a moment longer. Santos looked up from the wounded pilot, whose dog tags read Jennifer Hayes, 2LT, USAF. She was young, probably on her first deployment, probably scared as hell before the crash knocked her unconscious. Her F-16 had been returning from a reconnaissance mission when it simply disappeared from radar. No distress call, no emergency beacon, just gone, until a shepherd reported seeing fire on the mountainside. Dustoff 7-2, package is secured and ready for transport. We'll have her loaded in 60 seconds, but you need to know we're about to have company. Heavy company. The sound of diesel engines echoed off the canyon walls as 3 technical vehicles rounded the distant bend, their mounted heavy machine guns already traversing toward the crash site. The Taliban fighters had finally gotten organized, and they weren't interested in taking prisoners. Martinez's helicopter appeared through the swirling snow like an avenging angel, its landing lights cutting through the darkness. But as the Black Hawk touched down, everyone knew the hardest part was just beginning. Getting in was always easier than getting out, and the mountains of Afghanistan had claimed more aircraft than enemy action ever would. In her distant hangar, Zara watched the rescue unfold through satellite feeds and radio chatter, her heart pounding as she guided her people through a dance with death that she knew by heart. The first RPG streaked past the Black Hawk's tail rotor with inches to spare, its explosion against the cliff face showering the aircraft with deadly shrapnel. Martinez fought the controls as her helicopter bucked like an angry bronco, the smell of burning hydraulic fluid filling the cockpit. Taking heavy fire, we've lost hydraulic pressure on the primary system, switching to backup. Her co-pilot's voice remained steady despite the chaos, years of training overriding the natural human response to imminent death. Santos and his team moved with practiced efficiency, sliding the unconscious Lieutenant Hayes into the helicopter, while return fire from their defensive positions kept the approaching technicals at bay. But ammunition was running low, and more enemy vehicles were appearing on the ridgeline like wolves circling wounded prey. Wrench, Dustoff 7-2 is loaded and ready for extraction, but we've got a problem. Hydraulics are failing and I'm showing multiple warning lights. This bird might not make it out of the valley. Zara's mind raced through possibilities, calculating weight distributions, emergency procedures, and terrain features with the kind of instant analysis that separated good pilots from legends. Her fingers flew across multiple keyboards, pulling up technical manuals, weather data, and emergency landing sites with the desperation of someone who'd learned that salvation often hid in the details everyone else ignored. Dustoff 7-2, I need you to listen very carefully. You're going to perform a running takeoff using the slope of the ridgeline to gain initial lift. It's unconventional and it's dangerous as hell, but with your current weight and damaged hydraulics, it's your only option. The doubt in Martinez's voice was barely perceptible. Wrench, that's not a standard procedure. If I get the angle wrong, you'll crash and burn, taking 8 good Americans with you. But if you trust me, if you follow my instructions exactly, everyone goes home tonight. Your choice, but decide fast, those technicals are getting closer." In the cargo bay, Flight Medic Reeves worked frantically to stabilize Lieutenant Hayes, whose vital signs were deteriorating rapidly. She needed immediate surgery, the kind only available at Bagram Airfield, still 40 minutes away through mountain passes that could kill them all. Her pulse was thready, her breathing shallow, and internal bleeding was a real possibility. The mathematical precision required for Martinez's emergency takeoff would have challenged a test pilot with perfect aircraft and unlimited time. Now, with battle damage and enemies closing fast, it fell to a mechanic's daughter from Kandahar to thread the needle between survival and catastrophe, using nothing but radio waves and faith. The mountains watched as the Black Hawk began its desperate ascent, rotors clawing at air too thin to provide adequate lift, while muzzle flashes from below painted the night in deadly aurora. Lieutenant Hayes stirred to consciousness as the Black Hawk climbed through 8,000 feet, her eyes focusing slowly on the unfamiliar faces surrounding her. The morphine Flight Medic Reeves had administered dulled the worst of the pain, but couldn't touch the deeper confusion of someone who'd been unconscious during their own rescue. "Easy, Lieutenant. You're safe now. We're taking you home." Reeves monitored her vitals while simultaneously preparing for the emergency surgery she might need to perform if they didn't reach Bagram in time. Her blood pressure was stabilizing, but the head injury remained a wild card. Hayes tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper against the helicopter's roar. "My aircraft. Did anyone? Was the mission data recovered?" The question surprised Santos, who was more accustomed to rescued pilots asking about their own injuries rather than classified intelligence. But Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes wasn't just any pilot. She was a reconnaissance specialist, and the camera systems aboard her crashed F-16 contained surveillance footage that could determine the success or failure of ongoing operations. "Ma'am, we were focused on getting you out. The aircraft is a total loss, but—" "The hard drives," Hayes interrupted, trying to sit up despite Reeves's restraining hand. "Someone needs to go back. That intelligence. People will die if it falls into the wrong hands." Martinez's voice crackled through the intercom. "Wrench, our patient is awake and talking about returning to the crash site for data recovery. Please tell me that's not going to happen." In her command center, Zara felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions. The reconnaissance data Hayes had been collecting was undoubtedly valuable, possibly critical to ongoing operations against high-value targets. But sending another team back to that kill zone would be suicide, and she'd already pushed her luck further than any reasonable person should. Dustoff 7-2, negative on return mission. "Whatever intel was on that bird isn't worth more American lives. We got the most important thing, we got the pilot." But even as she said it, Zara's trained mind was already analyzing possibilities. The crash site would be crawling with Taliban fighters within hours, and if Hayes was right about the intelligence value, the implications could extend far beyond one failed mission. Sometimes the hardest decisions were the ones that came after the rescue was over. Hayes's vital signs strengthened as they approached the trauma center at Bagram, but her eyes remained fixed on the helicopter's ceiling, calculating the cost of her survival in currency that had nothing to do with her own life. The emergency room at Bagram's combat hospital erupted into controlled chaos as Lieutenant Hayes was wheeled through doors that had seen too much trauma and too many heroes. Army surgeons worked with the methodical precision of people who'd learned to save lives under impossible conditions, while the dust from Dustoff 7-2's rotors still swirled in the night air outside. Colonel Marcus Thorne waited in the hallway, his usually immaculate uniform wrinkled from a night spent coordinating rescue operations from multiple command centers. At 52, Iron Thorne had seen enough combat to fill 3 military careers, but the successful extraction of Lieutenant Hayes felt different, personal in a way that had everything to do with the voice that had guided them through the darkness. "Sir," Martinez approached with the after-action report, her flight suit still stained with hydraulic fluid from the damaged Black Hawk. "Lieutenant Hayes is stable. Doctors say she'll make a full recovery, though she might be grounded for a few weeks while they monitor the concussion." Thorne nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere. "Chief Martinez, in your professional opinion, could anyone else have guided that rescue? The approach vectors, the emergency procedures, the real-time navigation through zero visibility." The question carried weight beyond curiosity. Martinez had flown search and rescue missions for 12 years, through every type of weather and combat situation imaginable. Her answer would matter not just for after-action reports, but for the future of someone whose voice had saved 8 American lives. "Sir, with all due respect, I've never heard navigation like that. Whoever this wrench is, she knows those mountains like they're her backyard. The approach she talked us through wasn't in any manual I've ever studied. It was pure intuition backed by experience." In the maintenance hangar, Zara sat surrounded by the radio equipment that had transformed her from forgotten mechanic to mission commander in the span of a single night. The satellite feeds were dark now, the emergency frequencies quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Lieutenant Hayes's words about intelligence data echoed in her mind like an unsolved equation. Her laptop chimed with an incoming message from an encrypted military server she hadn't accessed in 4 years. The sender line read simply, "THORNE, M-Call USAF. Technical Sergeant Casme, report to base operations at 600 hours tomorrow. Dress uniform required. We need to discuss your future with this Air Force." The message was signed with his full rank and title, but the underlying tone suggested something far more complex than a simple debriefing. Outside the hangar, the first hints of dawn painted the Afghan sky in shades of possibility and redemption. Dawn broke over Kandahar airfield like a promise written in gold and crimson, casting long shadows across runways where C-17 Globemasters prepared for another day of missions that would determine the fate of a war-torn nation. Technical Sergeant Zara Casme stood before her mirror, adjusting dress blues she hadn't worn since her court-martial 4 years earlier. The uniform still fit perfectly, though the woman wearing it had changed in ways that went deeper than the silver threads at her temples or the lines around her dark eyes. 4 years of exile had taught her the difference between rank and respect, between following orders and doing what was right. The decorations on her chest told a story of service that had been temporarily interrupted, not ended. Base operations buzzed with the controlled energy of a major command center, where decisions made over coffee and classified briefings rippled across continents. Colonel Thorne's office occupied a corner of the building, its windows offering a view of the flight line where her former colleagues prepared for missions she was no longer allowed to fly. "Technical Sergeant Casme reporting as ordered, sir." Her salute was crisp, professional, and carried no trace of the resentment she'd nursed during her years of mechanical purgatory. Thorne returned the salute, then gestured to a chair across from his desk. The office walls displayed commendations, unit photographs, and maps of Afghanistan marked with operational zones and forward operating bases. But Zara's attention was drawn to a single photograph on his desk, 8 people in flight suits standing beside a Black Hawk helicopter, all of them alive because of her voice in the darkness. "Sergeant Casme, before we begin, I want you to know that Lieutenant Hayes is going to make a full recovery. The doctors cleared her for light duty, though she'll be grounded for at least a month while they monitor her concussion." The relief that flooded through Zara surprised her with its intensity. She'd guided dozens of rescues during her active flying career, but something about the young pilot's determination to complete her mission had resonated with her own stubborn dedication to duty. "I'm glad to hear that, sir. She seemed like a good officer. Thorne leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent a career reading people under pressure. Sergeant, what you accomplished last night was extraordinary. Not just the navigation and emergency procedures, but the command presence. You took control of a complex rescue operation and brought everyone home alive. The praise felt strange after 4 years of being treated like a broken piece of equipment. Zara had almost forgotten what it felt like to have her expertise valued rather than merely tolerated. Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes entered the small briefing room adjacent to Colonel Thorne's office with the careful movements of someone still recovering from a concussion, but her eyes were sharp with intelligence and determination. The young pilot wore a standard-issue flight suit with medical clearance tags still attached, evidence of her recent hospital stay. "Sir, you wanted to see me." Hayes's voice carried the slight uncertainty of someone who'd been unconscious during the most important night of her military career, awakening to find herself the center of a rescue operation she couldn't remember. Thorne gestured to a chair beside Zara. "Lieutenant, I'd like you to meet Technical Sergeant Casme, call sign Wrench. She's the reason you're alive." The introduction hung in the air like a bridge being built between two worlds, the active duty officer who flew missions, and the grounded veteran who fixed radios in forgotten hangars. Hayes studied Zara with the frank curiosity of someone trying to reconcile the voice that had guided her rescue with the mechanic's uniform before her. "Sergeant, I owe you my life, but I need to know, how did you know exactly where my aircraft went down? The GPS coordinates were perfect, but there was no beacon, no transponder signal." Zara had been dreading this question since the rescue ended. The truth involved admissions that could court-martial her all over again, while lies would dishonor the trust these people had placed in her voice. "Ma'am, I've been monitoring unauthorized frequencies for 4 years. Your F-16 transmitted a brief emergency signal on a channel that was supposedly decommissioned after a training accident. I triangulated your position using techniques that aren't exactly regulation." The admission settled between them like unexploded ordnance. Hayes looked to Colonel Thorne, whose expression revealed nothing about whether Zara had just confessed to another career-ending violation. "Lieutenant," Thorne said carefully, "what Sergeant Casme isn't telling you is that she's been conducting unauthorized reconnaissance of this entire region for years. Mapping terrain, tracking weather patterns, monitoring enemy communications. All on her own time, using equipment that should have been decommissioned." Hayes leaned forward, her concussion-dulled reflexes sharpening with professional interest. "Why? Why spend 4 years collecting intelligence from a maintenance hangar?" Zara's answer came from a place deeper than regulation or duty. "Because I couldn't let go. Because I knew someday someone would need that information, and I wanted to be ready." The silence that followed carried the weight of a career hanging in the balance, and a war that demanded heroes from the most unlikely places. The classified briefing room 3 levels below base operations existed in a world of sterile fluorescent lighting and soundproof walls, where conversations that could alter the course of nations took place over stale coffee and classified documents. Hayes sat across from Zara at a metal table that had hosted strategy sessions for operations whose names would never appear in history books. "Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you is compartmentalized at the highest levels. The mission I was flying when my aircraft went down wasn't routine reconnaissance." Hayes opened a folder marked with security classifications that made Zara's clearance level look like a library card. The photographs inside showed terrain that Zara recognized, valleys she'd memorized during her unauthorized surveillance, caves she'd marked on personal maps, compounds she'd watched through satellite feeds that technically didn't exist. But Hayes's imagery revealed details that made her breath catch. Weapons caches, communication equipment, and facilities that suggested something far more significant than random Taliban activity. We've been tracking a high-value target for 6 months. Someone the intelligence community calls the Ghost of Kandahar, a foreign military advisor who's been training insurgent forces in advanced tactics. The data on my aircraft's hard drives contains the first clear intelligence on his location in 2 years. Zara studied the photographs with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years reading terrain from the air. The compound Hayes had been surveilling occupied a position that controlled 3 major supply routes, positioned for maximum tactical advantage while remaining invisible to conventional reconnaissance. "Ma'am, this facility here," Zara pointed to a cluster of buildings in a narrow valley. "I've been watching it for 18 months. Traffic patterns suggest it's not just a training camp, it's a command center. The communication equipment alone would be worth a full squadron assault." Hayes nodded grimly. "Which is exactly what we were planning, until my F-16 decided to become abstract art against a mountainside. Without those hard drives, we lose our targeting data, our approach vectors, our entire operational plan." The implications settled over the room like smoke from a distant fire. Somewhere in those mountains, equipment worth millions of dollars in intelligence value was being picked over by Taliban fighters who might not understand its significance, but would certainly deliver it to people who did. Colonel Thorne entered the briefing room with the measured step of someone carrying decision that would affect lives across multiple time zones. His expression revealed nothing, but the folder in his hand bore the insignia of organizations that operated in shadows and spoke in classified whispers. "Ladies, I've just finished a video conference with people whose names I can't mention, discussing a mission that doesn't officially exist. The consensus is that we need those hard drives back, and we need them before enemy forces can exploit the intelligence." Hayes straightened despite her lingering concussion. "Sir, I volunteer to return to the crash site. It's my aircraft, my mission, my responsibility." "Negative, Lieutenant. You're grounded pending full medical clearance, and even then, sending the same pilot back to a compromised location violates every protocol we have." Thorne's refusal was absolute, but his attention had already shifted to Zara with a calculating intensity that made her stomach tighten. "Sergeant Casey, 4 years ago, you were grounded for conducting an unauthorized rescue mission that violated direct orders but saved 6 American lives. The board found you guilty of insubordination, reckless endangerment, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. They also noted that your tactical judgment was flawless and your flying skills were exceptional." Zara had memorized every word of her court-martial proceedings, but hearing them spoken aloud felt like excavating old wounds. "Yes, sir. I've had plenty of time to think about my decisions. What I'm about to propose will require the same kind of decision-making that got you in trouble the first time. The only difference is that, this time, we need someone willing to break the rules for the right reasons." The weight of implication settled across the briefing table like incoming weather, carrying the promise of redemption wrapped in the certainty of mortal risk. Outside the soundproof walls, Kandahar Airfield continued its endless cycle of operations, unaware that the next phase of Zara's exile was about to begin. The MH-6 Little Bird helicopter sat on the tarmac like a mechanical wasp, its sleek profile designed for missions that required speed, stealth, and the kind of pilot who could thread needles at 120 miles per hour. Chief Warrant Officer Danny Razor Manite performed his pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of someone who'd flown special operations missions in places that didn't appear on maps. Zara stood beside the aircraft in a flight suit she hadn't worn in 4 years, the fabric feeling strange against skin that had grown accustomed to mechanics' coveralls. The helmet in her hands bore her old call sign, Wrench, painted in silver letters that had survived her exile through pure bureaucratic oversight. "Ma'am, with respect, when Colonel Thorne told me I'd be flying with the legendary Wrench, I expected someone a little more legendary. Knight's grin took the sting out of his words, but the underlying question was clear. Could a grounded mechanic really pull off a mission that would challenge active-duty pilots? The question deserved an honest answer, not bravado. Zara had been asking herself the same thing since accepting an assignment that violated regulations, common sense, and the direct orders that had ended her flying career. Chief, 4 years ago I made a decision that saved lives and cost me my wings. Today, I'm making another decision that might save lives and cost me everything else. The difference is, this time I'm going in with eyes wide open. Knight nodded approvingly, recognizing the kind of calculated fatalism that separated professional aviators from weekend warriors. He'd flown with pilots who talked big and died young, and others who spoke quietly and brought everyone home. Something in Zara's voice suggested she belonged to the second category. Lieutenant Hayes approached the aircraft with the careful movements of someone still recovering from a concussion, carrying a tactical tablet loaded with intelligence data that could determine the mission's success or failure. Her medical clearance tags had been replaced with flight authorization forms that bent regulations without quite breaking them. "Sergeant, I know the colonel ordered me to stay grounded, but someone needs to be your eyes on the ground for equipment identification. Those hard drives contain specific encryption protocols. Without proper handling, the data could be corrupted or permanently lost." The truth was more complex than Hayes wanted to admit. The young pilot needed to see her crashed aircraft, needed to understand how a routine reconnaissance mission had nearly killed her, needed closure that could only come from facing the mountain that had tried to claim her life. "Ma'am, this isn't a sightseeing trip. We're flying into hostile territory with minimal support and maximum exposure. If things go wrong—" "They already went wrong, Sergeant. My F-16 is scattered across a mountainside, and intelligence that took months to collect is sitting there like a gift basket for anyone who wants to pick up the pieces. Let me help you clean up my mess." Knight finished his pre-flight inspection and gestured toward the little bird's cramped cockpit. "Ladies, we have a narrow weather window and a long flight ahead. If we're going to do this, we need to leave now." The mountains of Afghanistan stretched ahead like a promise of violence wrapped in deceptive beauty, while 3 Americans prepared to risk everything for intelligence that might already be lost to enemies who understood its value better than the bureaucrats who'd initially dismissed it. The little bird skimmed across the Afghan landscape at an altitude that would have violated every safety regulation in peacetime, its rotor wash flattening grass and scattering goats as Knight navigated valleys that appeared on no official charts. The helicopter's shadow raced ahead like a dark omen, marking their passage across terrain that had swallowed aircraft and crews for decades. Zara rode in the co-pilot seat, her hands moving across instruments with the muscle memory of someone whose flying skills had been interrupted, not erased. The landscape below unfolded like a three-dimensional map she'd studied from satellite images, but seeing it from the air again filled her with emotions she'd carefully buried during 4 years of exile. "Wrench, we're approaching the crash site. I'm picking up multiple heat signatures in the area. Looks like we've got company." Knight's voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who'd learned to deliver bad news without panic. Through the headset, Hayes monitored tactical frequencies from her position in the helicopter's minimal cargo space. The intelligence officer's training that had made her valuable for reconnaissance also made her invaluable for real-time threat assessment. "I'm hearing radio chatter on Taliban frequencies. They've got at least 2 technical vehicles in the area, plus foot patrols. Looks like they're conducting their own salvage operation." The wreckage of Hayes's F-16 appeared below them like an aluminum flower bloomed against dark stone, pieces scattered across a debris field that told the story of violent impact and miraculous survival. But Zara's attention was drawn to movement around the crash site, figures in dark clothing systematically searching through components with the patience of people who understood what they were looking for. "Chief, can you put us down on that ridge line about 500 meters north of the wreck? We'll need concealment for approach and a clear escape route if this goes sideways." Manite studied the terrain with the calculating gaze of someone who'd learned that landing zones in Afghanistan were rarely as simple as they appeared. The ridge line offered tactical advantage but limited maneuvering room, while the crash site below swarmed with enemy activity. "Ma'am, I can get us down, but extraction might be complicated if they spot us. These little birds aren't armored, and we don't have backup if things get interesting." Zara's response came from 4 years of watching missions from the sidelines, of knowing that sometimes the biggest risk was doing nothing at all. "Chief, I've spent 4 years wondering if I still had what it takes to make the hard calls. Today seems like a good day to find out." The helicopter settled onto the rocky ridge with the delicate precision of a surgeon's blade, its rotors gradually spinning down to silence, while 3 Americans prepared to recover intelligence that could alter the balance of power in a war that had already claimed too many lives. The descent from the ridge line to Hayes's crash site required the kind of tactical movement that separated combat veterans from weekend warriors. Zara moved with the fluid caution of someone whose survival instincts had been honed by missions she wasn't supposed to discuss, while Hayes compensated for her lingering concussion with determination that bordered on stubbornness. Manite remained with the little bird, maintaining radio watch and preparing for an extraction that might need to happen very quickly. His position on the ridge gave him overwatch of the valley below, where Taliban fighters continued their systematic search through aircraft debris. "Wrench, I count at least 8 hostiles around the crash site, armed with AK-47s and what looks like an RPG. They're being methodical. This isn't random scavenging. Someone told them what to look for." The implication settled between them like